Hi everyone, my name is Adenrele Sonariwo. Welcome to AkeFest 2021, and I'm so delighted to be speaking with artist Sabrina Coleman-Pinheiro. Hi Sabrina.
Hi, Darely.
How are you? How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, quite well actually. I'm in a pretty good mood.
Okay, good. I'm so excited to be just getting a better understanding of you, of your art, of you as an artist, as a mom, dealing with a mental health condition as well, and just really get a sense of your influences, your inspirations, and everything. Yeah.
I am. I'm so pumped. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to go back to a little over a year ago when we met for the very first time online as part of our
Mhm.
Young Contemporaries program. I remember it so well because it was the first one that we had to do in person. And with COVID and everything that happened, we contemplated cancellation, but then we figured we could achieve something online. And we're so glad that we did because it was a really special moment getting to know every single one of you that participated. I remember a session where each person had to talk about their work, and your work was abstract in nature. The expressions were quite different, unlike all the other artists. And I remember you coming up boldly and speaking about your work and what it meant. And that's where I want to start this afternoon. Can you tell us a bit about joining the Young Contemporaries program, which is a
Mhm.
program that we've done for the last 6 years, really to mentor and train? And what we say, we want to give young artists the resources and the tools they need to really make it within the art space.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So the Young Contemporaries program actually changed my life. It changed the way I thought about creating, the way I was creating, how I understood art and myself as an artist. Before the Young Contemporaries program, I lost my cousin to brain cancer, and she was my age. And I was going through a lot of emotions. It was very hard because, you go through life thinking you have all this time. And when you are faced with your own mortality, especially at that age, it was a lot to deal with, because she had plans, she had goals. And I was like, well, why am I different? And so one of the pieces I had actually made for my application was called Anxiety. And it was just the burst of colors. There was a lot of tension, a lot of just clashing of emotions because I felt very overwhelmed and I didn't really know where to turn to. Considering the fact that I've actually dealt with an anxiety disorder for most of my life. And so I sent that in. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And when I got into the program, I couldn't believe it. And I felt so happy because I felt like mental health was something that, we weren't talking about a lot as a society and something that we needed to pay more attention to. Now, going through the program, speaking to the different artists, having the kind of like them mentor us virtually, it really caused me to think about, okay, what I was trying to say, how I was trying to say it, okay, how can I improve this mode of expression? How can I find a way to better explore these ideas?
I want us to talk a bit about that first work, because we always say that when we're looking through the proposals, we look for potential. And sometimes when you see the work of abstract expressionists, there tends to be this, especially within the Nigerian space or African space, you hear people say, my 3-year-old can do this, or my 5-year-old can do this. And so I want you to speak particularly to that work, because I remember the conversation that we had during the session, which won me over. And just in terms of your use of, I know that your work has since changed from that, but that was very sort of first glimpse into your work. As I said to you, when I remember that work, I think about just the tension and the chaos that's going on in there, and the splash of colors and the way in which you splash the colors on. There was a lot of red, you could see a bit of darkness in it as well. So I wanted you to talk a bit more to that piece in terms of I understand that you were at a vulnerable place. You had lost someone close to you who is also close in age to you as well. Expressing your sort of state of mind at that moment in time into that piece. What did that feel like, and what were you trying to convey with that piece?
So I guess I'll start with abstraction within like kind of Nigerian society and African society. There's this idea, like you said, that the artist just comes and pours paint on a canvas and, they're done for the day. Well, a lot of times people don't take into account the fact that to create an abstract version of something, you have to truly understand it. To break something apart and reassemble it you have to understand how it works in the first place. So in creating an abstract piece, you have to understand color, form, space, composition, because you don't have the figures and forms to hold on to. Abstraction is very tasking because there's no frame of reference like you would get in like figurative work, right? You essentially, as the artist, you're in charge of that, and you have to create that. And to create that, you have to really understand art in itself, the creative process, and what you're trying to say. With that piece, that piece is made up of layers and layers of paint. So I have paint that I've scraped, paint that I've laid back on, and to a large extent, it was also like really meditative, right? Because I'm dealing with all these emotions, and all you can do is come back to the canvas and put your paint on and scrape it off and put it back on and try to see what the piece is trying to tell you. Try to listen to it, and in some way, I guess, get a better understanding of what I'm going through. With that piece, it gave me the opportunity, I guess, the piece, I mean, I'll call it like my friend in a way, because I ended up spending a lot of time with it, and in creating it, it was like having a conversation, you know. So I'm putting red in it, and I'm like, okay, I need to darken this. Why do I need to darken this red? Because based on what I'm feeling right now, based on the depth of this pain, this shade does not properly convey that, right? So in creating that, I was also having a conversation with myself with the piece, and really just trying to unearth these feelings, because that was one of the first times really that I had to confront my own mortality and come to terms with the fact that the whole concept of having enough time didn't really exist.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think somebody even in the class had mentioned how an abstract form of expressing is easy, and all you just have to do is paint and then explain it however you wish to explain it. But I think you did a very fantastic job of just sort of taking us through what that piece meant to you. And as you said, it was very therapeutic and meditative and while creating. That was our sort of first exposure to you as an artist. And then over time, I think the boot camp, we had like a 2-week intensive session of just spending every day together. And then the next stage was that we moved on to, you're one of the artists, 11, I think, selected to move on to the next stage, which was being physically with other artists in Ekiti. But I want you to talk about, okay, so you presented your work, and then the next 2 weeks for you, what was that process like, and how did it help shape your artistic practice today?
Going through the 2 weeks of intensive training, because it was actually really, really intense, going through that had me question a lot of things I had kind of held on to, right? So I knew at my core I wanted to do abstract art. I enjoy the avenue of expression that is like abstraction, but I also wanted to, in a way, I don't know if personalize or throw myself into the canvas, if that makes sense. And in going through and speaking to the numerous people we spoke to, one of the things that they pushed was exploration. I think sometimes, especially with anxiety, you worry, or I worry about making a mistake or doing the wrong thing or painting in the wrong way. And going through the boot camp really let me know that it was okay as an artist, especially as a young artist, to explore and to really dig into your materials and try things. And in going through that, I realized that I wanted abstraction, but I also wanted to throw in some figuration, but not too defined. I wanted the figures to hold onto the colors that I was trying to express in anxiety. So, but one of the pieces I created right after is called Meeting New People. And as someone that suffers from anxiety, it is a harrowing experience. Every single time I have to meet a new person, you know, there's a lot of questioning, you know, there's a lot of worry, there's a lot of angst about how the interaction is going to go. Let me even go back a little bit. Another thing I learned from the boot camp was being able to, I don't know if the word is conceptualized properly, but I was talking about anxiety before boot camp, and it was a massive umbrella, and I just kind of threw everything into it. But in going through the boot camp, I realized that instead of just holding on to anxiety like that, there's so many different bits of it that I can tackle. And in tackling those multiple bits of it, I end up being able to build a practice out of it. And so that's what I did. So I said, okay, this is anxiety, this is the umbrella. What part of it do I want to tackle right now? And that allowed my pieces to have more depth. And so that's actually how meeting new people came about, because I was dealing with kind of intrusive thoughts with meeting new people and how stressful that is, especially for someone that suffers from anxiety.
Okay, so before we get into that piece, you've mentioned that you suffer from anxiety. I want you to talk to me a little bit about that. When did you first realize that you had a mental health condition? At what age did you realize that? And how did you even come to terms with that? Was there some sort of medical diagnosis, or did you just realize it yourself, or just help us understand that?
So it's interesting because anxiety actually runs in my family. And growing up, I was just always like, I was a moody child. And I think they just assumed that I was just always moody or like anxious about things or worried. And it wasn't until I got to university and I'd gone to university. I went to university in Oregon. I think my school was 1% Black. So there weren't other Nigerians there. And I went through a depression, and I ended up sitting down and actually going to see a counselor who referred me to like a therapist. And I had sessions, and they started asking about my childhood, what I went through, if I'd ever experienced these types of symptoms before. And at that point, it was like a light bulb went off, and I was like, wait, it's not normal to constantly panic and worry about things. Like it's something that with the right help, you can live a better life, or more like a fuller life in a way, because my anxiety really stopped me from doing a lot of things, from meeting a lot of people, from interacting. And so after that, I started in therapy, and then I went on medication. And after university, I came back to Nigeria, and then, it was like starting all over again, because it was like, well, you don't need medication. You don't need to worry. Everybody worries. Don't think about it. It's a sign of weakness. As a woman, if you're going to worry about this, what's going to happen when you start your life? So there were all these things. And it wasn't until after, and we're looking at how many years, maybe 6 or 7 years. It wasn't until after I had my child and I suffered from postpartum depression and intrusive thoughts got a lot worse, that I went back to get more help. So I went through, I don't know how many years of just having to deal with my symptoms, because when I moved back, I was told that, they weren't valid and I shouldn't be thinking in that way, and I was just bringing more misery to myself. And so after I had my son and I went through postpartum depression, I went back to my doctor and I told him, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I've been through this in college. I started on medication. I went off medication and now it's back, And he kind of let me know that it's not something you just shake off. Because it's not a visual kind of injury, if somebody has a cut arm or they're bleeding, you say, oh, go to the hospital, you need to take care of yourself. But when it's something mental and it's internal and it's hard, you don't see it, we assume that it doesn't exist or it doesn't really have that much of an effect on the person. So I did that. I went to the doctor and then I started seeing a psychiatrist, and they prescribed me medication, and it changed the way I lived my life, changed the way I thought about things. It actually is probably one of the reasons why I was even able to apply for the Young Contemporaries, because before I was medicated, I would have seen the Young Contemporaries and I'd have had like 50 million thoughts about how it would not work out. And I would just be like, this is not going to work out for me. I shouldn't bother. But because I was taking care of myself mentally at that point, I was trying to handle it. Even though I was going through a loss, it seemed like a viable opportunity.
Right. You said something about in this environment, you felt like the condition was not valid. The theme of this year's Ake Festival is generational discordance. And I was having a conversation with you a couple of days ago just about how this idea of mental health and how different generations think differently about it. Talk to me about your generation, your mother's generation. Is there even a difference? What is that difference like?
It's interesting because with my mother's generation, dealing with any kind of mental health issues was a sign of weakness. As a woman, you're meant to be strong. You're carrying the family on your back. And because they did not deal with that trauma, they ended up passing it on to their children. So a lot of the worries I have now stem from dealing with certain like childhood issues as well. And with our generation, I mean, I guess with the advent of the internet and also having traveling more and being more globalized and seeing how other cultures deal with it, we're a lot more open to talking about our issues and discussing our issues and trying to get to the root of it because we realize that we don't want to continue the cycle. We don't want to pass on that trauma to the next generation as well. I know when I first started painting about my mental health struggles, I had people tell me that, no, don't do this. They'll think you're crazy. And there was such a fear about being seen as somebody that I guess was struggling with something that I guess is taboo within our society. You know, like, no, you never want anyone to question how fit you are mentally. But it's like, if you are actually going through this and this is your challenge, what better way to create and express and be as honest as you can in your art?
And I know you mentioned just shortly before now that you feel like your mother's generation, they carried on some of those like trauma and all that. But I also think that even that generation, the way they might have thought about mental health is different. It's just explained. I think there's some level of support that comes now because I think about the exhibition that we had in our new Los Angeles space that you showed in, and your mom coming into the show and talking about doing a short video. I'm talking about the work and all that. There seems to be some level of support that you're enjoying now, even though you might feel like you might think about it differently. Do you want to talk about that?
Seeing my mom there, I think for me was an amazing opportunity because in our relationship, my mom and I, we've come such a long way. And to have her be there and understand it, not just be there to say she's present, but to understand the pieces and understand what I'm going through. It was just the most amazing experience ever. And it feels really good to have that support because I know that in her day, it wasn't something that existed, In her day, she wasn't going to talk to her mother or anyone about whatever challenges she was facing. It just wasn't an option. So for her to also be able to offer that support to me was something that was very important to her as well. So it was amazing. It made me so happy.
I know it was really beautiful to see that support, and that she had so much joy in her. Like she was excited. She was really excited. I wanted you to move on to another thing that you had brought up, which is when you had your son, and just the sort of postpartum depression that you felt just shortly after. When we think about being a female in general, or being an African female, they always say that we have so many problems. First of all, you're a female, right? Then you're Nigerian, then you're African. There's just so much that you have to contend with, like with all those qualifications. But then now you're a mom, and there's this whole conversation around visual artists, and when you get married and when you have children, then you stop painting, XYZ. So talk to me about that. What does it feel like being a mom and having to paint? Did you feel like painting also helped with some of that depression that you felt shortly after having your baby?
Yes, it did. I think it gave me somewhere to go to. I think sometimes what happens as a woman, as an African woman, because I think, and a Nigerian woman, I think it's very important to be specific because some of our challenges are very specific to us, is that you give and you give and you give and then you're depleted and there's nowhere for solace. There's nowhere to go to. There's nowhere that is your own, And having art, painting, creating was something that I would want to as truly mine. And it's been my saving grace in those moments where, it's too much. You need something you can come back to, something that is stable. I know my acrylics will not fail me, That's something that was very important. But then also, there is that belief that once you become a mother, a lot of African female artists, once you get married, become a mother, you forget about art because, that's not your priority now. It's important, I guess, to have a very strong support system. So in my case, I'm lucky. My husband is very supportive, so I don't have to get back to make dinner or give Marcel a bath or do whatever I need to do because I know he's going to take care of that because I need to be in the studio. And for people that may not be privileged to be in that kind of situation, I guess it's a question of figuring out, okay, what can I let go of and what can I hold on to? unfortunately, you can't have everything at the same time. Like, I would love to believe that you can, but I think as I get older and maybe a bit more cynical, you realize that you really can't. So sometimes I realize that I'm a very good artist, but I might not be as present as a mom, or I'm a very good mom, but sometimes I'm not spending enough time in the studio. Something has to give, and it's important to be able to make some of those sacrifices and just like to trim the fat so you can make some more time for yourself. It's hard. There's no easy way. I think I just take every day and see, okay, what can I achieve with this day? And I've learned that, I guess with me personally, the better organized I am, the better I'm able to use my time. So before I'm leaving my studio, I'm washing my brushes, I'm making sure everything is arranged. So as I'm coming in, I can get into painting because I know that I don't have the time to kind of sit around and just
So you have to kind of just maximize the time.
You have to so because every bit is important. And I think having those other things that are kind of vying for my attention and my time has made me be like have more respect for my time. So it's made me more organized because I have to be. I don't have the option of not being.
So I really, really enjoy working with artists because one of the things I love most is just getting to understand your influences, your inspiration, and really, I feel like it's oftentimes a reflection of the artist's state of mind. Sometimes when you see, I've watched some artists start off like just being single and you see some of the really interesting things they create, and then to maybe a breakup, and then you see the change in the work. It's all of a sudden very dark and moody, and then something happens, maybe they get married and then they have children and it's a bit more now controlled and all that. So just sort of going through the seasons with them, I really enjoy that. And I want to understand if you have those kind of seasons where we can sort of tie in your work to the way you're feeling at any point in time. Are we going to see influences or inspirations from your son or from your life generally? I'm just curious to know that.
Yes, actually. And that's, yeah. So interestingly, when I got signed to Really, a lot of my pieces that I created were on stable ground. And it was because I finally felt like I found stability. A portion of my life was kind of stable or sorted in some way. The introduction of a foreground where you have some sort of stable kind of land where these forms are existing on really was a big influence on that. And then now, I recently moved to Toronto because my son has some developmental challenges. So I'm like, okay, let's try to get you some help. We moved to Toronto, but then setting up a new practice here, figuring out what my supplier should be, getting a studio, managing my kid with my home life, with my studio life. And if you notice, this is actually one of the newer pieces I'm working on. They're floating. I felt for a long time when I first moved here that I was in a constant state of limbo, existing in this space and there's nothing around you, and that actually has been a key factor in how I'm treating my backgrounds for my newer pieces. I mean, I still have my pieces but my forms that are conflicted and are dealing with all these emotions because those emotions always exist. But what happens and what changes over time is the background and the environment in which they find themselves.
It's interesting that you say that, but I was also curious about just sort of other influences. So apart from like your state of mind, form of literature, is there any books that you enjoy reading, any films, or any other influences that sort of impact your work or we can see in your work?
Yeah, I'm an avid reader. I actually love, to be honest, sometimes I feel like I prefer the company of books to people. It sounds horrible, but a lot of books. So I enjoy reading books about other artists and whatever challenges they faced because it's almost like having a conversation with like an older colleague and learning about how they overcame whatever challenges. I find that sometimes when I'm lacking inspiration, instead of looking at paintings or looking on Instagram and seeing what different artists are doing, I'd rather read what they have to say about their process and how they overcame whatever they kind of overcame. One of the books I've gotten into is called Nine Street Women, but it talks about the women of the abstract expressionist era and kind of how they came into that. Because a lot of times when we think about abstract expressionism, you think about mostly the men. So the women, even though they played a pivotal role, they're not really spoken about. So just reading about them, their challenges, and in some cases how some of them their careers took a backstage to their spouses' careers, and just learning about kind of how they manage that. So that's a big thing for me. And then also I enjoy poetry. I think that it's almost like painting, but with words. I find it very interesting. I find that sometimes when I'm reading a poem and I'm creating that visual imagery, I sometimes get like an aha moment, and I'm like, okay, this actually makes sense. This is the sentiment or the emotion I'm trying to pass through in my painting. This writer, this poet gets exactly what I'm trying to say. So yeah. Oh, music, actually. I think that's the last thing I'll say. I really like 60s music. So I love like Sam Cooke, Nina Simone. Like I like music from that era because they were dealing with so much and they were still able to create such beautiful sounds. And there's something very tortured in that, Yeah, 60s, 70s era music. Yeah.
When you talk about abstract expressionists and even against their male counterpart, I feel like, and then I think back to an artist that I often have you reference, Sam Gilliam, right? I think he's about 80 years old now, and it took forever for the art world to catch on to his work, just pretty much because he was creating work that went against the canon of what an African American artist should really be creating.
Yes.
And so I feel like we artists that create in abstract form, it's sort of like you have to just stay the course, right? And it's a very sort of lengthy process for people to sort of get to understand your work. When I look at some of the works in one particular series, it's very easy for the ordinary eye to look at it and think, oh, this is all the same thing. Like I'm looking at one work, but how do you respond to that? And what is it about each piece? What sets each piece apart? I mean, I feel like if you spend time really looking, you can sort of pick it out, but I want you to respond to that sort of reaction to your work. Yeah. Opinion.
Yeah. I definitely, I get what you're saying, because I think the approach I'll come from is how I guess I would like people to experience my pieces. And I like to think of it as when someone is going through a challenge, when a close one or whatever, close one is going through a challenge, a lot of times people don't come up and just tell you their problems. The most tortured people have the biggest smiles. The most depressed people find a way to make other people smile, right? Because we don't want to share that pain. We want you to spend a bit more time, look closer. And so that's the approach I want people to take when they look at my paintings. It's easy to look at something and just walk past it, especially with the generation we live in. But I want them to like stand in front of it and really look. Take the time to look at how these colors are interacting with each other and how they are trying to fit inside the form, but they can't in some cases, so they're spilling out. And really just talk, I won't say talk, but spend time with it like you would a close friend or someone that's going through something, and you're trying to listen to their worries, you're trying to understand what they're going through, you're trying to spend time with them, because I will say it's a bit of a big ask in the world right now because people don't have a lot of time, but it's the biggest thing with my pieces. I think that if you walk past it, if you just glance at it, it defeats the purpose. Because in creating these pieces, I spend a lot of time layering these colors over each other, and it's almost like sharing a little secret with the viewer, So the more you stare at them, the more you look at them, the more you understand what these forms are going through. The more you, I guess, see, in some cases, bits of yourself in them. It requires the viewer to dedicate their attention. It requires attention. I think that's actually the word I'm looking for, to spending time kind of looking at these pieces and engaging with them and trying to understand why they make you feel how they feel. So if you're looking at one of my forms and the colors are just visually annoying, it's a question of why do those two colors annoy you in that way? Why is that clash so annoying to your eyes? Why does that tension affect you in this way? What do you think it should be? Did you come in front of the piece with an expectation of how these colors should work? And now that you haven't met that expectation, or your expectations have not been met, how does that make you feel, and why do you feel that way? So in looking deeper at these pieces, spending time with them and trying to look at how these colors interact, it's the hope that my view, the audience are able to, I guess, get a better understanding of themselves and why they're reacting in that way, and also be more, what's the word, empathetic to those that are tortured by conditions that are really not their fault. These forms are existing in a space not because they want to exist in that space or because they have chosen to exist in that space. They have these colors occurring within them, not because they've chosen to have those colors occurring within them, but that is the state that they have been given, and they're dealing with that. And as a viewer, it requires a bit of empathy for these forms, for their torment, and also like attention and care. I guess that's that's how I would want people to look at this work.
Great. I'm not sure that it's annoying to look at. I think it's, for me, it's soothing. I like some of the earlier work. But I was going to, you already spoke a little bit about it. I was going to talk about your process, because one of the things that I think is lost when you look at work online or computer, or when you send it on social media, you're missing out on texture, a lot of the texture in the work, and sometimes the intricacy and the precision of the work. And so some of that can be lost when you're just looking at it through a screen. But when you see it up close, of course, you can get to appreciate the technique and the texture of the work. So you spoke a little bit about it earlier, but I want you to go into a bit more depth about what your process is like, the sort of layering process and all that.
I guess, first of all, I will say that I do think that sometimes I feel like the camera is my enemy with my work because a lot of the texture is lost, and that's such a key part of the pieces. But with my pieces, when I'm creating them, I'm going through, so I'm working with heavy body or really thick acrylic paint and thinned down acrylic paints and glazes. So I'm working with these two opposites and having them interact with each other. So I'm laying down thick acrylic paint, I'm scraping off some parts, and then I'm glazing over lighter paint. And what happens when I glaze over that lighter paint is that the thicker paint forms wells, and the lighter paint I'm glazing over it kind of sits in those wells. And so there's an interaction between these two viscosities of paint. I enjoy painting over the acrylic when it's dry because there's something that happens. So when I paint over and I have maybe 6 or 7 layers in and it's dry and you have irregularities in the texture, and I take my palette knife and I take thick acrylic paint and I paint over it again, what happens is certain parts of these textural forms grab onto the paint. So there's a bit of chance that is so beautiful to see. It's almost like light hitting an object, and the parts that are higher up are the ones that get hit by light. So when I take a lighter shade of paint and I take my acrylic paint and I put it over it, and you have those peaks grab it, it's almost like light hitting them. So I go through layers and layers. It's almost like the actual painting in itself is in the process, if that makes sense. Like the actual painting, the actual piece of work is in the layers versus just the final piece. Because I think sometimes what happens sometimes is, as a viewer, you come and you see the final piece and that's all you see. But the actual piece, because I'm coming to my studio every day with different emotions, right? And I'm putting those emotions into the painting and into the piece. So each layer is like a diary or catalog of whatever challenges I'm facing. And then you have the final piece, which kind of sits in front of, which is seen by everybody. And in a lot of ways, it's a testament to the human condition, because we have kind of how we look, which is the end product. And we have kind of all we're dealing with and all we're battling with internally. So I guess my process speaks to that as well. The layering, the thickness of the paint, the lightness of the paint, the multiple colors, the colors that peek through, because in some holes you see a hint of red or yellow or green. And it's just it's peeking at you. It's trying to come out, but it's covered by the rest of all these other colors and layers as well.
So you're British, Sudanese, and Nigerian heritage. Sounds very complex. Can you break that down for us? And then you were working in Lagos, Nigeria at the point when we saw your work and you were part of the Young Contemporaries program, and now you live in Canada. You spoke a bit about that transition, but I want to speak more about the difference, if there's any sort of difference in creating and in the creation process, as well as that identity.
My identity is actually very interesting, and it's something I haven't really delved into as much as I can. Growing up, unlike a lot of other people that could wake up and say, oh yeah, I can trace my family to this village, I never really had that opportunity because my great-grandfather came with like Niger Delta Trading Company. He came in, met my great-grandmother, they had my grandfather, and he left. So for the longest time growing up, there was a part of me that I had no connection to. I had a foreign name. I was living in Nigeria. People ask me, oh, why is your name Coleman? And I never really had an answer to give them because, well, I didn't know that part of myself. It wasn't until recently, my cousin actually did a genealogy trace and she found my great-grandfather's family in Kent. And so it was like finding a massive piece of myself because I did not know kind of what that was. And then on my mother's side, my grandfather on my mother's side is actually part Sudanese. So his his parents moved from Sudan to what is currently Arachuku. And so it's interesting because that's also another part of my lineage I haven't even explored. And it's something that I guess I don't know, I feel like I maybe will go into it in the future. It sometimes gives me the feeling of not really being anywhere because I guess also I was raised around people going to school in Nigeria, around people that could trace the root of where they came from down to their village, down to their great-great-great-great-grandfather. And a lot of times, I guess those people didn't really understand what they had, especially considering I was lacking some of that as well.
So Sabrina, I know you just recently had to move from Lagos. So as a young artist, we had met you, of course, living and working in Lagos, but because of some of the challenges that your son is experiencing, you've had to move to Canada. So tell me about your work process, how that change has sort of affected your work process.
So moving here from Nigeria was a lot to deal with because, in Nigeria, I had a support system. I had my mother-in-law, I had my mom and my dad, I had a nanny to take care of my kid. And then also my studio was in the house. So I would just wake up like 4 a.m. and walk to my studio and start painting. And there were all those things that I guess I didn't take into account when I first moved. So getting here, finding a studio, finding a space, finding suppliers, everything, it was hell at first. Considering the fact that I also, first of all, moved with my son. My husband wasn't with me, so it was just him and I. And throughout that period, I wasn't producing because I couldn't even think about making art. I felt like I was being, I don't know what the word is, but there was such a burden of so much I had to do. And when you also take into account taking care of a special needs toddler, there's a lot of time and attention that I really couldn't do anything else. Now, when my husband moved over, it was a lot easier because he was able to share some of that, and I was able to start structuring my day a lot better. And then once my son got into school as well, it also helped me structure my day. Now I know that if I drop him off in school, I can kind of come to the studio and start working and get the kind of work done. Another thing that was challenging was, I guess, so in Nigeria, accessing supplies was a bit of a challenge because I work with artist grade acrylic. And in Nigeria, what was mostly available was student grade acrylic. Now, based on the kind of work I'm doing, I'm working with high viscosity paint, so really thick paint, and low viscosity paint, so really thin paint. And so I needed to make sure that based on kind of the colors I wanted to use, I needed a high pigment density. And you only get the really high pigment load paint when it's artist acrylic. And so I had to ship a lot of that in. And I was hemorrhaging money doing that. So moving here and being closer to the manufacturers, it's a lot easier for me to access this paint. Now, on the flip side, with my other supplies like my canvas and all that, I had a carpenter that was making it, he would make it, I'd buy my canvases, stretch it, deliver it to the house at a really affordable price. But here, I'm going and I'm buying pre-stretched, and so there's been some things I've had to kind of let go of and some things I've had to pay more for. But just setting up the practice as a whole was not easy because I was pretty settled in Nigeria with how I was doing my things and how I was painting and how I was kind of running my studio. So I had to restart, and not just restart, but restart and figure out how to make it work here. I'm working in 100 square meters of space. that being the case, I can't have 2 easels or 2 heavy-duty easels. I need like a heavy-duty easel and like a travel easel. That way I can work in a bigger piece and a smaller piece. So learning how to manage my stock and all that, it's a whole different environment. And I've just had to be more aware of this difference and modify my studio practice to it. So I don't like exist in like a cluttered space with like stuff everywhere and all that. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I know you're now working on your first solo exhibition. So tell us a bit about that, what you're working on and what people can expect to see.
So yes, I'm working on my first solo. I'm really excited about it. And it's going to be the accumulation of the series I've been working on for a while, which is Fragmented Versions of Self. And it's really going to be forcing people to not just look, but truly see. And what that means is, and this kind of would allude to something I've spoken about earlier, how, sometimes you look, like with my pieces require attention. They require to look and really pay attention to kind of what's happening within them and what's happening within the forms. And that's something I'm going to explore deeper within my solo. I'm going to, in manipulating, I guess, the point of view of the audience, in bringing these forms closer and closer and closer and closer to the point where you can't escape what is standing or what is right in front of you. I'm hoping I can get them to really see the turmoil in these forms. So that's, with my soul, that's the main thing that's at the forefront of my mind. How do I take these forms from being separate from the audience and essentially erase the space between the viewer and these forms? Because in actual waking reality, in real life, while there's a separation between the people dealing with mental health challenges and the people that are not dealing with mental health challenges, we all exist in the same space. So I'm trying to put the viewer and my forms in the same space, but do that in a gradual way. So they are kind of going through the process of getting closer and closer and closer and closer to the point where they actually cannot escape the trauma that's happening in this other person, this other form. I'm really excited about it. I'm super pumped.
We're excited as well. Yeah.
Yes.
I like to think of our young contemporary artists as the voice of this generation. And so my very final question to you is that as the voice of this generation, what is it about your art? Why is it important? What do you hope that your art can achieve? How do you want it to impact people?
I want people to, I guess, with the different groups of people, for people that are suffering or going through trauma, going through mental health issues, I want them to understand that, they found a kindred spirit and that they don't have to go through it alone. I want them to understand that sometimes the burden of dealing with mental health issues can be a lot and can feel like it's too much, but in seeing forms that are tortured and are completely broken inside, I'm hoping that they find some level of solace in that. For the people that are not going through mental health issues, but maybe are caregivers or have someone in their environment that is, I want the pieces to encourage empathy. I want them to look at something that's broken, but also see the beauty in that which is broken and see, I guess, understand that a lot of this turmoil isn't self-inflicted. You don't ask to be mentally ill. You don't ask to go through these challenges. So I'm hoping that in having them experience these pieces, I not only open up the avenue for like discussions on mental health and the challenges from the sufferers and the caregivers and improve the understanding of these challenges, but I'm also hoping that, we're able to encourage empathy in these situations as well. Yeah, I hope that as people experience my work, they get a better understanding of what it means to carry the burden of being, not even being, because I think we're all broken in different little ways, but of feeling broken, constantly broken, and understanding that really that is your reality. So you have to in some way find the beauty in it and find a way to kind of manage that.
I think it's really great that you spoke from the caregiver's point of view as well, because I feel like I, for instance, was a caregiver about 2 years ago, and I think it was after that process that I actually went to a therapist for the very first time. So before that, I'll be like, what are you talking about? There's no need for that. I'm fine, but just I think it's very important to take care of yourself mentally. It just makes everything work well. So thank you so much for giving us an insight into you as an artist, and then your art practice as a mom, as an abstract expressionist as well. It's been so great getting to hear about it all. And thank you to everybody else for listening. And thank you to Aki for having us be part of this edition. We're so grateful. Thank you
so much.
Let me introduce a new wave, we change the rules. A new app that you can use. Wanna change your life, then choose. Save money and invest. Pay bills when you decide. Safe and secure for you when you need a loan. Request it. One bank for you, one bank for me. So chill and enjoy the ride. Stop the call and to count on it. One bank.
One Bank by Sterling. Open a current account and start transacting.